Silence seldom fell upon the bustling city of Babylon, one of the largest in the ancient world. It was a commercial hub of half the planet, a religious center filled with priests and temples, and a great seat of scientific innovation in astronomy, math, and medicine. It was the namesake of several Babylonian empires and home of the wondrous Hanging Gardens. It was always a busy, boisterous place, yet it did fall silent once on the afternoon of June the 11th, 323 B.C. On that cloudy day in Babylon by the banks of the Euphrates River, a hush quieted history, as a priestly scribe noted the weather on this clay tablet, and added the words that shocked his world: "The king is dead." Just 32 years old, King Alexander the Great of Macedonia suddenly died as he had lived, unpredictably, mysteriously, momentously. His last breath marked the onset of a new era in history that we call the Hellenistic Age. It would last 3 centuries until brought to a close by the death of another famous leader, Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. What do we mean by the Hellenistic Age, and why does it matter? That has been the story of my life. When I was young, I had no intention of studying Hellenistic history. I figured any historical period with the word hell in it must have been pretty awful. Only later did I learn that the name is a modern one derived from ancient biblical references to people called the Hellenisti. This meant Jews who adopted Greek culture, as recorded here in the book of Acts. In the 19th century, the great Prussian scholar J.G. Droysen applied this term to the entire civilization created by Alexander's merging of Greek and non-Greek populations. Droysen saw in what he named the Hellenistic Age a pivotal period appointed by God to prepare the world for Christianity. In essence, said Droysen, God sent Alexander and his army to pave the way for Jesus and his followers. After all, the world would need a universal language to help spread the gospel beyond Judea. Thus, Alexander's conquest dispersed Greek culture far and wide, so that the New Testament could be written and read in Greek. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount may have been spoken in Aramaic or Hebrew, but it was written in Alexander's Greek. Not everyone shared Droysen's favorable view of the period. Most classicists doted on the earlier Golden Age of Greece, or the later Imperial Age of Rome, the worlds of Sophocles, Thucydides, Plato, Virgil, Livy, Tacitus, and so on. From that point of view, the Hellenistic Age was but a disappointing slump between the tent poles of ancient high culture. It separated what Poe famously eulogized as the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome. In the 19th century, the famous historian George Grote remarked in the first pages of his 12-volume History of Greece that he would not include the Hellenistic Age because it is of no interest in itself and is only so far of value as it helps us to understand the preceding centuries, meaning, of course, the classical period. The death of Alexander drew down the curtain on all that was useful to his readers, and he insisted that the Hellenistic Age had no bearing on what he called the destinies of the future world. That strange opinion was warmly praised by a reviewer in London's Quarterly Review after gushing, "Mr. Grote's History of Greece is the most important contribution to historical literature in modern times." Little wonder that when I first studied ancient Greece in college, my up-to-date 1975 textbook, this very textbook, still stopped where the Hellenistic Age began, the death of Alexander the Great. It left me wondering what happened next. It was like reading a novel with the last chapter missing, or buying a puzzle without some of the bigger pieces. Fortunately, I was able to find those pieces thanks to two extraordinary mentors in graduate school, Harry James Dell and Stanley Mayer Burstein. They helped me see the big picture and even to fit in a few of the missing pieces myself. Over the years, I've witnessed an explosion of interest in Hellenistic history and culture, in books, archaeology, museum exhibitions, new research centers, conferences, workshops, and podcasts. What accounts for the change? For one, we have found a mirror of our modern age in the history of the Hellenistic world. Our cult of personality, for example, globalism, imperialism, and arms race, colonialism and decolonization, culture wars, state-funded science, segregated cities, religious conflict, economic inequality, commercialization and consumerism, bureaucratic governments, and so on. Today, we might say that the Hellenistic Age did as much to prepare the world for Gen Z as it did for Jesus. Secondly, there's been a steady pipeline of new evidence to support research and writing. While some worry that we may have exhausted our store of classical sources, the Hellenistic period keeps offering us fresh inscriptions, papyri, coins, and archaeological sites, some in areas thousands of miles from the Aegean homeland of the Greeks. In those sources, we often find the everyday people that were missing from the classical sources, the sort merely lampooned as stock characters in the comedy of Aristophanes, for instance, but real enough in the papyri of Egypt. One of my favorites is a Greek recluse living in an Egyptian temple where he recorded his life on papyrus. We know his nightly dreams and what he thought they meant, why he disliked and distrusted some of his neighbors, and his fantasies about some Egyptian girls. When and where else in ancient history can you discover avatars of the people you meet every day walking our modern streets or living in a metro station? A third source of interest is the high human drama of Hellenistic history, beginning, of course, at Babylon. Alexander's greatest failure was to leave no competent heir behind. His son Alexander IV would not be born for another few months, and his closest adult relative was a debilitated half-brother named Philip Aridaeus. Partisans of the unborn baby and unfit brother battled to a standstill outside the walls of Babylon, resulting in two kings and the cabals that controlled them both. Those unhappy with this outcome later resolved to put Alexander back on his throne. They held council around his trappings of office, pretending that he was still alive and ruling his empire. In the end, however, the true heirs of Alexander were neither his inept and ill-fated kinfolk, all of whom, men, women, and children, were eventually murdered, nor the desperate dreamers who gathered around his empty throne. Great fortunes favored the bold. Wealth, power, and opportunity spilled from the growing cracks in Alexander's empire. Generals fought each other to become kings in their own right. Then kings fought kings to keep their shares. This produced more than a dozen new dynasties with over 200 Hellenistic kings and queens, from Ptolemy and Seleucus to Cleopatra and Agathoclea. Hellenistic society, especially in its upper echelons, revolved around its new royalty. Philosophers advised them, poets extolled them, artists portrayed them, priests prayed for and to them, soldiers served them, and enemies fled them. Conspicuous in their regalia, particularly the royal headband worn as a diadem, they amassed palaces, libraries, treasuries, artworks, and military victories. They flooded their realms with royal coins that advertised their qualities, real and imagined. They marketed themselves on money as soter, the savior, or aniketos, invincible, euergetos, the benefactor, Epiphanes, God manifest, plus Nicephorus, victory bearer, and so on. The Hellenistic ideal was for aggressive, heroic, cultured, divine, just, and generous leadership. But it was not all glamour, glory, banquets, and booty. There was also a lot of royal blood. Kingdoms had to be won and defended on the battlefield. Any ruler who failed to live up to his or her own hype could expect rivals to challenge him to the death. This severely limited the life expectancy of Hellenistic royalty. For instance, only 2 of the first 14 kings of the Seleucid dynasty died at home in their palaces, and one of those 2 was assassinated. Ambition and opportunity motivated more than just the self-made kings and queens. Their money fueled upward mobility for others and lured waves of Greek colonists into conquered lands as soldiers, bureaucrats, teachers, and tradesmen. Suddenly there were thousands of Greeks living up and down the Nile, the Euphrates, the Oxus, and the Indus rivers. Many of these immigrants married so-called barbarian wives and raised bicultural children. Even so, imported Greekness was generally lorded over local customs. Yet it was at times a two-way street, on which you might meet a Greek recently converted to Buddhism, or one being buried as an Egyptian mummy. Hellenistic multiculturalism was therefore messy, often involuntary and even violent. Uprisings were common, Egyptians, Syrians, and Jews against Greeks, and as always, Greeks against other Greeks. There is so much of importance to investigate that many great scholars have devoted their lifetimes to Hellenistic studies. For one, the incomparable Peter Green needed nearly 1,000 pages just to sketch out the main lines of Hellenistic history, science, art, religion, literature, warfare, politics, and social relations. He built, of course, upon the work of other greats, including Michael Rostovtsev, Dorothy Thompson, Frank Walbank, Susan Sherwin-White, Eric Green, Stanley Burstein, and so many more. Being scholars, they have naturally disagreed on many key questions. How much cultural and religious fusion actually took place? What were the merits of Hellenistic art, literature, and philosophy? Was there real economic growth or merely exploitation? How much freedom did cities and other communities surrender to authoritarian rulers? Why didn't Hellenistic technology reduce that world's dependence on slavery? The debate is endless but lively, and it proves that George Grote and his followers got it all wrong when they put a stop sign in front of the Hellenistic Age. They looked backward, as fixated on the classical past and afraid of the future as those in Babylon who kept counsel around Alexander's empty throne. It took generations of braver souls, Ptolemies and Seleucids then, Walbanks, Greens, and Bursteins now, to recognize the immense possibilities offered by the Hellenistic period. What a story we are witnessing still. I'm Dr. Frank L. Holt, thanking you for spending a few moments in my ancient world. I hope that you subscribe, like, and share my videos with others, and I look forward to reading your comments. And I'll see you again very soon.